The Picts, the people who lived in the north and east of Scotland in the late Iron Age and early medieval period, captivate our curiosity because so much knowledge about their culture has been lost to time. For example, the Pictish language is lost and only traces survive. No manuscript or narrative text can be identified as Pictish, and except for regnal lists, all early written sources concerning the Picts were compiled by their neighbors. And yet, despite all that has been lost about the Picts, they have left behind some of the most visually striking and enigmatic sculptures of the first millennium. We know that the Picts became Christian. Bede, in his ecclesiastical history, written around AD 731, rejoices in the fact that all the peoples of Britain, including the Picts, were Christian. But what did the Picts believe before the introduction and acceptance of Christianity? Prior to the introduction of Christianity, the Picts, like other neighboring Celtic, Roman, and Germanic cultures, practiced some form of polytheistic religion. The life of St. Columba, written about AD 700, records some of Columba's encounters with the pagan Picts, giving us a small glimpse of their native religion, albeit through a Christian lens. From this text, we get the sense that the Picts worshipped multiple gods, that aspects of their religion may have been nature-focused, and that the Picts had a caste of religious elites. Once, when Columba was in Pictland, he blessed a well that the Picts worshipped as a god. On another occasion, the Pictish religious leaders called on a family to belittle the God of the Christians and to magnify their own gods. The class of Pictish religious leaders are called magi, or magicians, in the life, and they seem to hold similar social and political roles as the Druids in other early Irish saints' lives. For example, Columba has several encounters with a magician who was a member of the Pictish royal household and King Brithai mac Maelcon's foster father. Early documentary sources provide appreciably little detail about religion in pre-Christian Pictland. However, the best visual evidence for pre-Christian Pictish belief has been right in front of us the entire time. It survives on Pictish carved monuments, ranging from the early incised stones to the later elaborate reliefed carved monuments and cross-slabs, and has until recently gone unrecognized. There are several unusual axe and weapon brandishing figures found in the corpus of Pictish sculpture. There are homogeneous traits in the early incised examples, and on later monuments these figures do not occur in isolation, but in artistic programs that include otherworldly creatures. The discovery of the Conan stone in 2019 was a game changer. In addition to the chained beast around the cross on the front of the stone, beneath the symbols on the reverse is a panel filled with mythical imagery. On the left is a crouching figure who holds a sword in one hand and a round shield in the other. Next to a cauldron, its opponent is half horse, half man, who carries axes in both hands. The scene from the reverse of the Conan stone is very similar to the Mirthly panel. From left to right, we have a bird-headed man with a sword and shield fighting a hybrid beast-headed figure, similar in stance and appearance to the one on the Conan stone. The remainder of the frieze depicts two hippocamps, followed by a hybrid marine creature and a man about to be eaten by a monstrous four-legged animal. There is nothing in the iconography of the scenes on the Mirthly or Conan stones that is based on reality. On Pictish cross slabs and relief carved sculpture, I hope to show that these hybrid figures and unusual creatures represent gods and supernatural animals in Pictish mythology, and that they are derived from the native pre-Christian belief system of the Picts. Supernatural beings or entities such as gods, goddesses, and mythical creatures are common in mythological narratives, and that is what I believe we have here on some of these Pictish stones. Pictish art did not just appear out of nowhere. Some Pictish symbols are highly reminiscent of the symbolic imagery found on Iron Age Celtic coins, particularly those from Britain. The internal decoration of incised symbols is most closely associated with the Latin style of the Iron Age rather than medieval insular style. The geometric frames of the symbols persisted, but their internal decoration changed with the fashion. The symbol tradition existed before and after the Christian conversion. The beast or monstrous-headed weapon-carrying figure, sometimes called the formidable man, is also found on both the earlier incised and later relief carved stones. As we shall see, the incised examples are likely pre-Christian in date, indicating that this iconography was used before and after the Christian conversion. In other words, when these singular figures were carved, this was at a time when they and other gods were worshipped. Like the symbols, these figures continued to be carved on monuments in more elaborate scenes after the Christian conversion, when they ceased to be worshipped but were still remembered in the popular mythology of the Picts. Although this has been hotly debated in the past, the evidence of onomastics and artworks suggests that the Picts were a Celtic people who spoke a Celtic language. Therefore, the best starting point for analyzing Pictish pre-Christian religious and mythical carvings is to compare these figures with related evidence from their Celtic and Romano-Celtic neighbors. Weapon-carrying figures in early Pictish art fall into two groups: the left-facing spear carriers and the right-facing beast-headed or ogre-like axe or club carriers. This figure from Court Cave in Weems is the only forward-facing spear carrier. He is commonly referred to as Thor, but as we shall see, he is not the god of Norse mythology. Like the other spear carriers, the Court Cave figure holds a spear with a distinctive knobbed butt in his right hand. During Mike Arrowsmith's Pictish Art Society lecture, Helen Mackay suggested that the Court Cave figure might be the god Colchidius, a Celtic god worshipped in northern Britain, whose cult was adopted by the Romans. Chasing this lead, I believe she is right. Evidence for the cult of Colchidius is found along Hadrian's Wall and in the frontier region to the north, surviving as carvings in shrines, altar dedications, dedication plaques, and in the place name Fanum Colchidi, meaning Shrine of Colchidius. Around 20 inscriptions are dedicated to this god, 5 of which equate him with Mars, the Roman god of war. Wherever the Romans went, they brought their own religious customs with them, but they also incorporated local gods into their pantheon. The worship of the Celtic god Colchidius in military context in the far north of the empire is one example of this cultural fusion. The name Colchidius means something like reddish. Perhaps this association is attributable to his warlike affinities, red being a color associated with the blood of battle, or perhaps images of the god were painted red. In the northern British examples, Colchidius is usually depicted facing forward, holding a knobbed butt spear in his right hand and sometimes holding a shield in the left. He is usually shown naked or wearing a cloak. The Romano-British depictions of Colchidius are remarkably similar to the figure from Weems, and as Helen Mackay observes, attributes of the Romano-British god are also present in the other spear-carrying Pictish figures. For example, the stones from Collessie, Tulloch, and Rhynie hold spears with knobbed butts in their right hands. Collessie, Westerton, Tulloch, and possibly Rhynie are also naked. Collessie and Rhynie carry rectangular shields with central bosses in their left hand, the same type as held by a plaque dedicated to Colchidius at the Roman fort of Bewcastle. Could the Picts have worshipped Colchidius? Are the spear carriers Pictish representations of this northern god? The late Alistair Mack was the first to suggest that the Collessie figure may be a warrior god, And in comparison with the northern British cult of Colchidius, this is a distinct possibility we should entertain. We know that there are linguistic connections between the Picts and their Brittonic neighbors, but perhaps the socio-cultural connections were much stronger in the Iron Age, the impact of the Roman walls being an obvious catalyst for cultural divergence. We now recognize that the Pictish symbol system began to develop earlier than previously thought, and that this system was a native development likely influenced by Roman literate culture. If Roman influence helped spur the growth of the Pictish symbol system, then we should also consider how Romano-British religious customs may have influenced the Picts. Roman religious customs, including venerating images of the gods, making offerings on altars, and worshipping in shrines and temples, had a profound impact on the development of religious art and architecture in the Celtic world in the first few centuries AD. In Roman Britain, it was normal to venerate an image of a god or goddess in a sacred site, such as a natural space, or more commonly in a temple or shrine, which were known as nevata in the Celtic and Romano-Celtic world. Was this also the case in pre-Christian Pictland, and are these stones evidence of such a practice? The Kallesi stone, which is in its original position, and Rhynie are located near Pictish barrow cemeteries. Radiocarbon dates for the cemetery at Rhynie places this around AD 420 to 570. Rhynie number 3 is also associated with enclosures that likely had a ritual function. The Tulloch stone was located near a ringed enclosure, which might have been a burial. It is possible that the carving of these monuments was contemporary with the use of their nearby cemeteries, or perhaps the cemeteries developed around these stones and any pre-existing structures, as there are parallels for the siting of Pictish cemeteries near pre-existing monuments. At Weems, dates obtained from the nearby Sliding Cave placed activity at this site between AD 244 to 388, and more recent dating confirms activity between the 1st and 5th centuries. The evidence suggests that the spear carriers were carved before AD 600, but how early are they? Their weapons, personal adornments, and nakedness are better situated in the first few centuries AD, when the Proto-Picts were in opposition with Rome. Nudity is a trait of Iron Age Celtic warfare, frequently commented upon by classical authors. It is thought that the Celtic practice of going into battle naked may have been a religious custom or a tradition reserved for elite troops of Celtic warriors. The Roman historian Livy tells us that the Celts fight naked to make their wounds conspicuous, so that the whiteness of their skins was more stained by the black blood, a description that echoes potential characteristics of the color associated with the god Colchidius. Knobbed spear butts are found primarily in Ireland and Scotland, but also England. Most are dated to the 1st centuries BC and AD, though examples from Scotland suggest that they were still in use in the 4th century. The recent photogrammetric scan of the Kallesi stone has revealed 2 circles on either side of the figure's neck. This represents a torque, the prestigious neck collar popular throughout Iron Age Celtic Europe. The torque generally went out of fashion around the 3rd century AD. The same type of rectangular shield with the central boss as depicted on the Kallesi stone is also found on the Bridgeness and Balmuldy Roman distance slabs, which were made around AD 142 during the construction of the Antonine Wall. As the ancient Celts prepared for inevitable battle with the legions of Rome, classical accounts depict an accelerated worship amongst the Celts to their war gods. Roman military activity in Scotland may be the reason the spear carriers were carved. The examples are in areas near Roman camps or forts made during the Agricolan and Severan campaigns. The spear carriers are likely to be Roman-era examples of an engraved war god, possibly Colchidius, carved at a time when the military threat of Rome was a very real presence in Scotland. And yet, they display the characteristic hallmarks of Pictish figure art, suggesting that the distinctive Pictish style came to life in the Roman period. The second category of early carvings are the incised, right-facing, monstrous or beast-headed axe or club brandishing figures. These include Bald Lair, male, and Rhynie number 7 from Barflat, better known as the Rhynie Man. These figures and their adornments are comparable with later examples on relief carved sculpture, where such figures play a prominent role in the mythological imagery. If their identity is the same, or at least related, the later imagery gives the impression that this was an important character in Pictish mythology, probably a significant god. Rhynie Man carries an axe. The lost Strathmartin figure likely had an axe. The male figure has an axe and a club, and the Ball Blair figure has a club. The axe, either an axe hammer, bearded, or wedge-shaped axe, is a persistent feature of this character in Pictish art, suggesting that this may have been an object used to identify the deity and one that may have played a key role in his cult. Recent excavations at Rhynie suggest that the Rhynie Man likely stood in a socket by the outer ditch of the Barflat enclosure. We are starting to learn more about ritual and rulership in Pictland due to the recent work of the Northern Picts project. Dating evidence places the activity at Rhynie between the 4th and 6th century AD, just prior to the Christian conversion. One of the many exciting finds from Rhynie is the miniature axe. Miniature axes have been uncovered from several Iron Age Celtic and Romano-Celtic sites in Britain, France, Austria, Switzerland, and Germany. These miniature axes are mainly found in sacral context, primarily temples and shrines. Because of their small size, they could have had no real function as a weapon or tool. Some may have been worn as jewelry or pendants, but most were likely votive offerings to a specific god. Frustratingly, we do not know the name of this Celtic god, but comparison between the later relief carved Pictish monuments and Celtic literature might provide us with some clues. It may seem very strange to us that pagan imagery can share a space with Christian iconography, and indeed the dominance of the cross on Pictish cross-slabs is one reason why we have previously looked to Christian literature to explain these unusual scenes. In the discipline of history and related fields, there is a persistent notion that there is a cliff-edge chronological divide between the ancient and medieval worlds. The thinking is that one day people in Roman Britain were Roman, and the next day they were not. One day they were pagan, and the next day fully fledged Christians knowledgeable in all of Christian tradition. This chronological bulwark is nonsense. The conversion to Christianity was not a comprehensive overnight process, and even when people converted, their minds were not instantly wiped clean of their previous beliefs and customs. There are 3 reasons why this mythical iconography in Pictish relief sculpture has gone unrecognized. Firstly, there is considerable variety in appearance. None of the carvings are mirror images of one another, indicating that these are artist representations of the same concepts. Secondly, there is variety in which mythical characters are included on the monuments, suggesting that we are dealing with multiple mythological narratives, events, and characters. Thirdly, on cross slabs, these mythical beings and creatures are either carved around the cross, sometimes in panels, or in friezes on a reverse face. There is variety in their placement on monuments because Pictish art did not follow a linear pattern of structure and storytelling. Although certain characters and their associations seem to be grouped in relative proximity, the narratives this imagery was intended to evoke was not necessarily presented in a chronological order or even on the same side of the slab. These aspects make it difficult for us to recognize the patterns, but a Pictish audience will have recognized the significance of each character and would then be able to relate the longer narrative associated with each image. Pictish mythical imagery on relief carved monuments can be grouped into the following patterns: weapon brandishing human hybrids, cauldrons, centaurs, intertwined serpents or serpent hybrids, dual hippocamps, single fish hybrids, a man being devoured by a beast, a mythical quadruped or four-legged animal, mythical oxen, possibly winged figures, and framing beast. Learning the traditions of Christianity and Scripture took time, and as religious customs shifted, one way in which people, especially secular people, made sense of Christianity was to compare it with their previous beliefs. This is apparent in the mixed iconography of Pictish cross-slabs and relief carved monuments. These artistic programs reflect a process of accommodation in which parallels between pagan myth are presented alongside Christian imagery to help convey the messages intended by the monument. The messages are Christian, and I strongly suspect that many of the stories being told through this mixed imagery are ones of death, Judgment Day, and rebirth. The Christian cross, the dominant element of cross slabs, symbolizes Christ's death and resurrection and how those who believed in him would be resurrected to have eternal life. Scenes from the Scandinavian Ragnarok, a battle between gods and otherworldly beasts that brings about the end of the world and the beginning of the new world, are commonly found amongst the mixed iconography of insular Scandinavian sculpture, because the pagan stories help to convey the Christian message of everlasting life after doomsday. The reason we can identify scenes from Ragnarok on insular Scandinavian sculpture is because later medieval texts recording this mythology survive. We have no written records to illuminate our understanding of Pictish mythology, and our only option is to compare this Pictish imagery with mythical narratives of neighboring Celtic cultures and Indo-European mythology more generally. Comparisons can be drawn between the Pictish axe-brandishing human figures and primary mythological characters in neighboring Celtic mythology. The Dogtha of medieval Irish literature likely reflects the folk memory of a primary pre-Christian Irish deity. His name means good God in the sense that he was the best at all skills. And Cath Magaturid, which is probably derived from a text written in the 11th or 12th century and based on 9th century material, the Dogtha is a large figure with a pot belly and a ferocious appetite. He is said to wear a dun-brown tunic that extends to his rump. He possesses a cauldron, which continually produces food, and carries a forked or pronged pole or staff, which is elsewhere described as a loddock. Irish loddock is generally translated as club, staff, or mace, but in other texts the Dogtha's loddock is described as having a smooth end and a rough end, the latter being able to kill men and the smooth end having the power to revive them. The sharp and smooth ends of the Dogtha's loddock does evoke images of an axe hammer type object. There are parallels between descriptions of the Dogtha, the Pictish axe and club wielder, and other axe, hammer, club, and thunderbolt carrying gods in Indo-European mythology. Their names are often etymologically linked or semantically related, and they are usually storm gods associated with thunder, hence the striking implements they carry. A few examples include Greek Zeus, who came to be associated with thunder, the Hittite god Tarhunt, who carries an axe and a thunderbolt, Scandinavian Thor, who carries a hammer, and the ancient Celtic god Taranis, who carries a thunderbolt and a wheel. The Pictish personal name Taran means thunder. The Pictish mythical imagery is also comparable to elements of medieval Welsh mythology. In Prydain a Nuven, a poem preserved in the 14th century Book of Taliesin, the chieftain of the otherworld possesses a magnificent cauldron. The leader of the otherworld is probably Aron, who features in the tale Pwll Pentwyg da Fel, in the Middle Welsh collection of tales known as the Mabinogion. In Branwen Ferllir, the second branch of the Mabinogion, there is a magic cauldron that restores life to the corpses of warriors that are thrown into it. But the cauldron is destroyed during a battle. What we lack in the medieval Celtic mythological literature are direct depictions of hybrid human and animal gods. Parallels certainly exist between the Morrigan, a mythological character who features in medieval Irish literature, and the bird-headed figures in Pictish sculpture. The Morrigan likely originated in the pre-Christian belief system of Ireland as a goddess of death and battle, and Mocha, one of her three personas, feeds on human heads. But the Morrigan only appears as a woman or a crow, not a combination of the two. There are no Irish or Welsh narrative equivalents of the Scandinavian Ragnarok, describing the end of the earth, but the Celtic otherworld and land of the dead is often associated with the sea and islands in mythological literature. The crossing of water to reach the otherworld has parallels elsewhere in Indo-European mythology, such as the river Styx of Greek mythology, which has to be crossed to reach the underworld. In Norse myth, the sea serpent Jormungandr encircles the world, only to release his grip to fight against the gods in Ragnarok. If the Picts had similar views of a watery otherworld, then this may explain the plethora of hybrid marine creatures and serpents in the Pictish mythical iconography. To summarize, the single incised figures most likely represent carved deities, idols worshipped by the pagan Picts. We may even be able to put a name to the spear carrier, as the parallels with the northern British war god Colchidius are striking. These are likely to be early, perhaps as early as the Roman incursions in Scotland, suggesting that the Picts had a long tradition of carving deities in stone. The identity of the axe and weapon bearer feels frustratingly close to discovery, and the sacral evidence of votive axes and comparisons with the mythology of other cultures strongly suggest that this figure was a Pictish god. Bede records that the Picts who live on this side of the mountains had given up the errors of idolatry when they were converted by Saint Ninian. The Pictish sculptural evidence suggests that prior to the acceptance of Christianity, that the Picts did indeed worship idols, probably in sacred sites and structures like their Celtic and Romano-British neighbors. As the Picts became Christian, on some monuments they chose to incorporate events and characters from their own mythology. A Pictish audience will have recognized these characters and could relate the longer narrative of these stories alongside the Christian messages of the stones. This paper has outlined the immense significance of Pictish figure carving and mythological iconography as a means for reconstructing the otherwise lost belief system of the Picts. Hopefully, this ongoing work and new archaeological discoveries will further illuminate our understanding of Pictish myth and religion. Thank you.